He was only 21 when everything ended in a terrible car crash. Rock and roll star Eddie Cochran died way too young, and what he left behind tells a really sad story. From his empty house that stayed the same after he died to the girlfriend he never got to marry, and the surprising fact that he didn't have much money even though his songs were super popular. This is the forgotten story of a music star who died too soon. Let's find out about the things he never got to finish. On the night of April 16, 1960, something really terrible happened to rock and roll when young American star Eddie Cochran got badly hurt in a car accident while he was touring in England. He had just finished his last show of the tour at a place called the Bristol Hippodrome, performing with another rock and roll star named Gene Vincent. The tour had been really successful, making British fans super excited and helping American rock music become popular across the ocean. After the concert, Cochran, Vincent, and others started driving back to London. They were going to Heathrow Airport, where they were supposed to catch a plane back home to America. To make the long overnight trip, they hired a taxi, a cream-colored 1960 Ford Consul Mark Roman 2-car driven by George Martin, a 19-year-old driver who wasn't related to the famous Beatles producer who had the same name. In the car were 5 people: Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent, Sharon Sheeley Cochran's girlfriend who also wrote songs, Patrick Tompkins, their 29-year-old tour manager, and Martin the driver. At about 11:50 at night, while they were driving on Bath Road through a town called Chippenham, the car went out of control at a place called Rowden Hill. The weather was clear and the road wasn't wet. But later, people found out that the car was going way too fast. Without hitting another car, the Ford Consul crashed into a concrete light post. The crash was really bad. Eddie Cochran was sitting in the middle of the back seat, and he quickly threw himself over Sharon Sheeley to try to protect her. His brave act probably saved her life, but sadly the crash made the left back door pop open and Cochran got thrown out of the car. He got a really bad head injury, probably from hitting his head really hard. Emergency workers quickly took all the hurt passengers to Chippenham Community Hospital and then moved them to St. Martin's Hospital in Bath. Even though doctors tried to save him, Cochran never woke up. At 4:10 in the afternoon the next day, Easter Sunday, April 17th, Eddie Cochran died. He was just 21 years old. The accident hurt other people too. Sheeley got hurt in her back and leg. Gene Vincent broke his collarbone and got seriously hurt in both legs, injuries that would bother him for the rest of his life. Tompkins got hurt in his face and maybe cracked his skull. The driver, George Martin, didn't get seriously hurt. After everything happened, Sheeley and Vincent went back to America, really shaken up and changed forever. Cochran's body was also flown home, and on April 25, 1960, he was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Cypress, California, after a private funeral. In a really spooky ending to this tragedy, Sharon Sheeley later told a magazine called Photoplay that Cochran had said something scary just hours before the crash. As they were getting ready to leave for the airport, he supposedly turned to her and said, "You know, Sherry, I've got a weird feeling that fate's not going to let us be together. Something awful is going to happen. I can feel it." After the terrible car accident that killed Eddie Cochran on the night of April 16, 1960, the police took the driver George Martin to court. He was only 19 years old. Even though the weather was good and the roads were dry, they found out that Martin had been driving way too fast, which made him lose control and crash into a concrete light post at Rowden Hill in Chippenham. No other car was involved in the crash. Martin was found guilty of dangerous driving, which was a serious crime since someone died and other people got badly hurt. He had to pay a fine of $50, which was a lot of money back then, and if he couldn't pay, he would have to go to jail for 6 months. Also, he wasn't allowed to drive for 15 years, which meant he couldn't legally drive a car for a big part of his adult life. But he didn't have to wait the whole 15 years. On May 7, 1968, just 8 years after the accident, a judge at the Bristol court let him drive again. The judge decided this because Martin had been having a really hard time with money during the years after the crash. Even though we don't know exactly what kind of money problems he had, Everyone understood that the accident had really messed up his life, both personally and financially. Meanwhile, things from the crash, including the wrecked Ford console and Eddie Cochran's personal stuff, were kept at the local police station in Chippenham. One of these things was Cochran's special Gretsch 6120 guitar, a signature orange one that was closely connected to his sound. At that time, a young guy named David Harmon, who was a police trainee working there, got to play Cochran's guitar. Harmon would later become famous in the music world as Dave D., the lead singer of the popular 1960s band Dave D., Dozy, Beaky, Mick, and Titch. This moment was a weird connection between the past and future in British rock history, one star who died too soon and another who hadn't become famous yet. As the years went by, people still remembered Cochran, especially in the town of Chippenham where the crash happened. They put up a plaque on Rowden Hill, marking the exact spot where the deadly accident happened. It was both a tribute and a warning about the dangers of driving too fast. Another important memorial was put on the grounds of St. Martin's Hospital in Bath, where Cochran had been taken after the crash and later died. The memorial stone sits in the old chapel area of the hospital. On the 50th anniversary of his death in 2010, the stone was carefully fixed up, and a plaque was added next to a nearby sundial to honor Cochran's memory. In 2018, more people worked to keep his memory alive. The Eddie Cochran Memorial Project started raising money to fix up the memorial plaque at the crash site and to put in a new feature called 3 Steps to Heaven, named after Cochran's song that came out after he died. The installation was designed not just as a physical tribute, but also as a symbol of Cochran's short life, amazing talent, and lasting influence on generations of rock and roll musicians. A lesser-known detail about the night of the crash also came out over time. Tony Sheridan, a young musician who would later work with the Beatles in their early Hamburg days, had asked to share the taxi ride with Cochran and Vincent. But both artists politely said no to his request, either because there wasn't enough room or they had other plans. That simple twist of fate saved Sheridan from the deadly accident, adding a chilling what-if to the night's tragic events. Besides Eddie Cochran's death, are you curious about his personal life? Eddie Cochran's romantic relationship with Sharon Sheely was as passionate and exciting as the music that brought them together. Sheely wasn't just a pretty face in the crowd. She was a rising talent herself, a gifted singer and songwriter with a smart sense for pop hits and a deep understanding of the music business. She had worked with manager Jerry Capehart, who also managed Cochran, which let her dive into the world of rock and roll from an early age. Before the two became a couple, Sheely had strong feelings for Cochran that he didn't seem to return. She had been crazy about him for almost 2 years, watching his rise to fame with the same mix of amazement and longing that many young women of that time shared. Determined to get his attention, Sheely took bold steps. She was originally a brunette, but she dyed her hair blonde, changing her look to stand out in the crowd. She also bought new clothes, all to try to appeal to the charming and rebellious heartthrob. Her chance finally came at the end of 1958 when she went to a New Year's Eve party hosted by Cochran in New York City. That night, her efforts worked. Whether it was the new look, the charm she showed, or just the right timing, Cochran began to see her differently. From that evening on, their relationship grew into something serious, built not only on attraction to each other, but also a shared love of music. Professionally, Sheely contributed directly to Cochran's career. She wrote several songs for him, including Love Again and Cherished Memories, showing both her skill with lyrics and her understanding of Cochran's emotional and musical style. Most importantly, she co-wrote the 1959 hit Something Else, a raw, energetic song that has since become one of Cochran's most famous tracks. She wrote the song with Bill Cochran, Eddie's brother, which showed how closely connected she had become with Eddie's life, both personally and professionally. By 1960, the pair had become secretly engaged with plans to build a future together. Their bond had grown beyond the excitement of a whirlwind romance. It had become something based on shared dreams and a desire to build a lasting partnership. But because of the pressures of fame and public attention, they kept their engagement private. Their love story stayed mostly in the background until decades later when it came back in popular culture. In 1988, Levi Strauss and Company made a TV commercial as part of its Levi's 501 campaign, which was centered around the theme of youthful rebellion and classic Americana, titled simply Eddie Cochran. The ad was directed by Sid McCartney and showed a stylized, dramatized story of how Sheely supposedly first caught Cochran's attention at the 1958 New Year's Eve party, all thanks to her wearing a pair of Levi's jeans. In the commercial, Sheely was played by actress Sharon Devlin, and the ad was presented as being narrated by Sheely herself, adding a personal and nostalgic layer to the storytelling. The music for the commercial featured Cochran's lasting hit, Come On, Everybody, a high-energy rock and roll song that perfectly captured the era's spirit and Cochran's style. The song was re-released as a promotional single, and the campaign was followed by a collection album of Cochran's greatest hits, introducing his music to a new generation of fans. Now, it's time for us to tour Eddie Cochran's homes. During Eddie's childhood, the Cochran family moved several times, which showed the money pressures and changing job opportunities of the post, depression, and wartime years. After spending a few important years in Minnesota, the family first moved to Oklahoma City. There, Eddie's exposure to American country and Western music got deeper. The rhythms of the South mixed with Western swing and the growing influence of honky-tonk were everywhere in Oklahoma during the 1940s. These sounds would later influence Eddie's fusion of styles, giving his music a unique voice that set him apart from many of his contemporaries. Eventually, the family settled permanently in California, where Eddie would spend his teenage years, and where his musical identity would truly take shape. The move to Bell Gardens, a suburb in southeast Los Angeles County, proved pivotal. California in the 1950s was a hotbed of musical innovation, a melting pot of cultures and styles. Young Eddie quickly became immersed in the dynamic music scene, absorbing influences from jazz, blues, country, rhythm and blues, and the emerging genre of rock and roll. Eddie showed an early interest in music and learned to play a variety of instruments, but it was the guitar that captivated him most. By the time he was in high school, he was already recognized as an exceptional musician. He was particularly inspired by artists like Chet Atkins and Les Paul, not only for their musical talent, but for their pioneering work in multi-track recording and guitar techniques, both of which Cochran would later experiment with himself. He formed a band with two school friends, and the trio began performing locally. Though still a teenager, Eddie's confidence on stage and his technical skill on the guitar quickly earned him a reputation. Around this time, he began recording demos and working as a studio musician, backing up other performers and honing his skills in professional environments. This period of intense learning helped Eddie develop not only as a performer, but also as a producer and arranger, giving him an unusually mature understanding of how to build a song from the ground up. His breakthrough came when he partnered with songwriter and manager Jerry Capehart, who recognized Eddie's star potential. Together, they wrote and recorded a string of songs that captured the restless energy of youth, blending Eddie's musical versatility with Capehart's understanding of the emerging teen market. One of their first big successes was Sittin' in the Balcony in 1957, which made its way onto the Billboard charts and introduced Eddie to a national audience. The Cochran family's move from the Midwest to the musical heartland of California had positioned Eddie at the forefront of a cultural revolution. He became a symbol of the new American teenager, cool, rebellious, and bursting with electric energy. In just a few short years, Eddie Cochran would leave an indelible mark on music history, helping to define rock and roll in its earliest and most exhilarating form. In 1952, when Eddie Cochran was just 13 years old. The Cochran family settled into what would become their most permanent and formative residence, Bell Gardens, a modest working-class suburb of Los Angeles County, California. The family took up residence on Gage Street, a quiet neighborhood lined with small single-story homes and close-knit families. Though unassuming in appearance, this corner of Bell Gardens would become the epicenter of Eddie's transformation from a curious boy with a guitar into one of the earliest pioneers of rock and roll. The post-war boom had turned Southern California into a thriving cultural melting pot, and for a teenager like Eddie, it offered the perfect environment to explore music. With Hollywood just a short drive away and the explosion of American youth culture beginning to stir, the 1950s in Bell Gardens was a time of jukeboxes, hot rods, and high school dances, an ideal backdrop for a young artist with ambition and raw talent. At home on Gage Street, Eddie practiced guitar relentlessly, often locking himself away in his bedroom to master the instrument. He had begun showing interest in music years earlier, experimenting with the drums, ukulele, and piano, but it was the guitar that truly captivated him. Inspired by country music stars such as Hank Williams and technical wizards like Chet Atkins, Eddie developed his own playing style, one that blended country picking, blues phrasing, and rockabilly swagger. It was during these hours of practice in the family living room and garage that he began to build the foundation of the signature sound that would later electrify audiences around the world. Eddie wasn't content with just playing alone. As early as junior high school, he began forming bands with classmates and neighborhood friends. These were often informal groups playing at local parties, youth centers, and school events, but they gave Eddie invaluable experience with live performance and musical collaboration. He quickly became known among his peers not only for his skill, but for his confidence and charisma on stage, a born performer even before he had a record deal. One of his earliest bands was called the Cochran Brothers, which despite the name included Eddie and a friend Hank Cochran, who wasn't related but shared the same surname. The duo focused on country and western tunes, performing locally and even securing some small-time gigs across California. Their harmonies and clean-cut style fit the popular tastes of the time, but Eddie's personal interests were beginning to shift. He was drawn to the emerging rhythm and blues sound, and more importantly, to the rebellious energy that was bubbling up in early rock and roll. Bell Gardens was close enough to Los Angeles that Eddie could immerse himself in the vibrant Southern California music scene. He frequented record shops, listened to late-night radio broadcasts, and attended local concerts whenever possible. He absorbed everything: guitar riffs, vocal styles, recording techniques, filing them away as inspiration for his own musical evolution. By the time Eddie entered high school, his talent had become undeniable. He started recording demo tapes, writing original material, and experimenting with multi-track recording, something that was quite advanced for a teenager in the early 1950s. His knowledge of sound equipment and studio processes would later earn him a reputation not only as a performer, but as a visionary producer and arranger. By 1959, as Eddie Cochran's star was rapidly rising, he and his family relocated from Bell Gardens to a new suburban home on Burness Circle in Buena Park, California. Nestled in northern Orange County, Buena Park was a growing community during the post-war boom, an area of new housing developments, wide streets, and a wholesome suburban atmosphere. For the Cochran family, the move to Burness Circle marked not just a change in address, but a symbolic step into a more settled and comfortable life, one that reflected Eddie's growing success as a recording artist and performer. The home on Burness Circle became Eddie's final family residence, and it was there that he would spend the last full year of his life. Though his schedule was increasingly consumed by tours, recording sessions, and public appearances whenever he returned home, Burness Circle offered him a quiet place to regroup, write music, and spend time with his family, particularly his supportive parents, Frank and Alice Cochran. It was a modest yet comfortable home surrounded by manicured lawns and friendly neighbors, a place where Eddie could escape the noise of the industry and relax in familiar surroundings. By this point, Eddie was no longer just a promising local talent. With hits like Summertime Blues, 1958, Come On Everybody, and Something Else, he had become a full-fledged rock and roll star. He was regularly featured on television, appeared in the film Go Johnny Go, 1959, and toured extensively across the United States. Despite his fame, he remained deeply attached to his family. He often brought music industry friends and collaborators back to the Burness Circle house, where jam sessions would occasionally break out in the garage or living room, much to the amazement of the neighbors. While living in Buena Park, Eddie continued to develop as not just a performer, but also a pioneering producer and studio innovator. He was one of the few artists of his era who understood the full scope of the recording process, from sound mixing to microphone placement, and he frequently experimented with overdubbing and multi-track recording in home sessions. Some of this creative work took place at Burness Circle, where he kept guitars, recording equipment, and notebooks filled with song ideas. His drive to control the sound of his music was ahead of its time, influencing later artists in the rock and pop genres. What do you think about Eddie Cochran? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.